What if every choice you've ever made, what to eat, who to call, when to speak, was already decided by your brain 7 full seconds before you even realized it? That's not a theory. That's not philosophy. That's neuroscience. And one man spent 50 years of his life proving it. His name was Benjamin Libet, a quiet, determined neurologist who dared to ask the question no scientist wanted to touch. Does free will actually exist? For decades, the scientific world ignored him. Then his experiment changed everything. Today, you're going to discover exactly what he found, why it matters, and what it reveals about the brain controlling your every move. For thousands of years, human beings have believed one fundamental truth, that they are in control of their own choices. You wake up in the morning and decide to make coffee. You choose to call a friend. You pick a career path. Every action feels deliberate. Every decision feels like yours. But what if that feeling of control was never real to begin with? This question didn't start in a modern laboratory. It started in the minds of ancient philosophers who debated the nature of human consciousness long before science had the tools to investigate it. The tension between fate and choice, between predetermined outcomes and personal agency, has existed across every culture and every civilization throughout recorded history. But by the mid-20th century, science was finally catching up. Neuroscience was emerging as a serious discipline. Researchers were beginning to map the brain, study electrical signals, and understand how neurons fired during human behavior. The technology was becoming powerful enough to ask questions that philosophy alone could never answer. And the most dangerous question of all was this: when a human being makes a conscious decision, what actually happens inside the brain at that precise moment? Does the mind give the command first, or does something else trigger the action before awareness even enters the picture? Scientists knew this question carried enormous consequences. If the brain acted before conscious thought, then everything humanity believed about personal responsibility, moral choice, and individual freedom would be challenged at its deepest foundation. The search for that answer was about to begin. Benjamin Libet was not the kind of scientist who chased fame. He was methodical, patient, and deeply committed to understanding the human mind in ways that most of his colleagues considered far too philosophical for serious laboratory work. Born in Chicago in 1916, Libet spent his early career studying the electrical activity of the brain with quiet dedication and extraordinary precision. What separated Libet from other neuroscientists of his era was his willingness to go where the evidence pointed, even when that destination made people deeply uncomfortable. While others focused on measurable behaviors and physical brain structures, Libet was obsessed with something far more elusive: the relationship between brain activity and conscious human awareness. He had read about a phenomenon called the readiness potential, a measurable electrical signal in the brain that appeared before voluntary movement. German scientists Hans Helmut Kornhuber and Ludwig Decker had recorded this signal in the 1960s, but nobody had connected it directly to the moment of conscious decision-making. Nobody had asked the critical follow-up question: does this electrical build-up happen before or after a person consciously decides to move? That gap in the research consumed Libet. He believed that if he could design the right experiment, he could finally measure the exact moment consciousness enters the decision-making process. It would require creativity, precision, and instruments sensitive enough to capture milliseconds of neural activity. He spent years designing exactly that experiment, and when he finally ran it, the results shook the scientific community to its core. The setup appeared almost too simple for a discovery of such magnitude. Benjamin Libet placed participants in a controlled laboratory environment and connected them to an electroencephalogram, a device that measures the brain's electrical activity in real time. In front of each participant, he positioned a specially designed clock with a rapidly moving dot rotating along its face. The instructions given to participants were straightforward. Move your wrist whenever you feel like it, completely spontaneously. No countdown, no signal, just whenever the urge naturally arises. And when you do move, remember the position of the clock dot at the exact moment you first felt the conscious urge to move. Libet then compared 3 separate data points. First, the moment the brain's electrical activity, the readiness potential, began building. Second, the moment the participant reported becoming consciously aware of their decision to move. Third, the moment the actual physical movement occurred. The results were impossible to ignore. The brain's electrical buildup began approximately half a second before the movement itself. That part was expected. What was not expected was that conscious awareness of the decision arrived nearly 300 milliseconds after the brain had already begun preparing for movement. The brain was initiating action before the person knew they had decided anything. Later replications and advanced neuroimaging extended this unconscious preparation window significantly. In some studies, suggesting predictive brain activity detectable up to 7 to 10 seconds before conscious awareness. The implications were staggering, and the debate that followed was immediate. When Benjamin Libet published his findings, the scientific and philosophical communities did not respond with applause. They responded with resistance. Because what? His experiment appeared to suggest struck at something far deeper than neuroscience. It challenged the entire foundation of how human beings understand themselves and their place in the moral universe. If the brain initiates action before conscious awareness arrives, then the question becomes unavoidable. Are you truly making choices? Or are you simply the last one in your own mind to find out what your brain has already decided? This is not an abstract puzzle. It carries real consequences for concepts like personal responsibility, legal accountability, and ethical judgment. Many scientists and philosophers pushed back hard. They argued that Libet's experiment only measured simple wrist movements, not complex real-world decisions. They pointed out that conscious awareness might still play a role in vetoing or modifying actions even after the brain begins preparing. Libet himself acknowledged this. He called it the veto power of conscious thought. Other researchers argued that the concept of free will needed to be redefined rather than discarded entirely. Perhaps freedom is not about originating an action from scratch, but about selecting, shaping, and sometimes stopping actions that the brain proposes unconsciously. The debate divided neuroscientists, psychologists, and philosophers into distinct camps. Some concluded free will was entirely illusory. Others argued consciousness still held meaningful influence. What everyone agreed on was this: the human brain operates in ways far more complex and mysterious than anyone had previously understood. To truly understand what Libet discovered, you need to understand the relationship between your conscious mind and the vast unconscious machinery operating beneath it at every single moment of your life. Because your brain is not one unified system making decisions together. It is a layered, multi-region network where most processing happens completely outside your awareness. Your conscious mind, the part reading these words right now, handles only a tiny fraction of your total brain activity. Neuroscientists estimate that the unconscious brain processes roughly 11 million bits of information per second, while conscious awareness handles fewer than 50. That gap is not a flaw. It is a feature built by millions of years of evolution. Your brain learned long ago that survival required speed. Waiting for conscious deliberation in a moment of physical danger meant death. So the brain developed powerful, unconscious systems capable of preparing responses, evaluating threats, and initiating movement before your aware self even registers what is happening. This is why experienced athletes react faster than thought allows. Why musicians play complex passages without consciously directing every finger. Why you pull your hand from a flame before pain fully registers in your conscious mind. The unconscious brain is not your enemy. It is your oldest and fastest protector. But this system also explains habitual behavior, emotional reactions, and deeply ingrained patterns that feel impossible to break. Every repeated experience literally reshapes neural pathways, making certain unconscious responses more automatic and deeply embedded over time without your conscious permission or awareness. Here is where the science moves from fascinating to genuinely life-changing. Because understanding that your brain pre-decides does not mean you are powerless. It means you need a completely different strategy for creating change, one that works with your neuroscience rather than fighting against it every single day. The field of neuroplasticity has established beyond reasonable scientific doubt that the brain remains changeable throughout your entire life. Neural pathways that drive unconscious decisions are not permanent. They are strengthened by repetition and weakened by consistent replacement. You cannot override your unconscious brain through willpower alone, but you can systematically reshape what it prepares for you.